Hey, what's going on? Y'all back with another one, back with another one. I'm just doing the final part of part three of utilitarianism. And yes, we're going to look at the effects of modern history and whatever and whatnot. So let's go look at here real quick. It says effects in the field, right? It says the effects of utilitarianism in other fields. They said the influence of utilitarianism has a widespread pre-meeting the intellectual life in the last 2 centuries. They said the last 2 centuries. And its significance in law, politics, and economics is especially notable. The utilitarian theory of justification of punishment stands in the opposition to the retributive theory, according to which punishment is intended to make the criminal pay for his crime, but according to the utilitarian and rationale of punishment is entirely to prevent further crime by either reforming, hear the word, let's listen, reforming the criminal or protecting society from him and to deter others from the crime through the fear of punishment. In its political philosophy, utilitarianism is based on the authority of government and the sanctity of individual rights. See, and upon their utility, here we go, providing an alternative to theories of a natural law, but natural rights or social contract. You hear that a lot. And I talked about this 2 years ago, by the way. Y'all can watch those streams, the political streams of social contract. And what kind of government is the best? He said, what kind of government is the best? Thus becoming the question of what kind of government has the best consequences and assessments to requires factual premises regarding human nature and behavior. Generally, utilitarians have supported democracy as a way of making in the interests of government coincide with the general interest, but they have argued for the greatest individual liberty compatible with an equal liberty for others on the ground that individuals are generally the best judges of their own welfare. But they have believed to the possibility of desirability of progressive social change through peaceful political process. You hear this a lot. That's what they preach. It's actually liberal, by the way. They support some democracies, but democracy is a loose word, and we already know utilitarianism birthed a lot of liberal concepts in America. So everybody's brainwashed by it. It has its pros and cons. We talked about it in part one. Part two. Part one, we give you an introduction of the philosophy. Part two, we gave you the pros and cons. And yes, it is very hedonistic, by the way. That's hedonistic laws, what you see. They use these theories to promote their political philosophies, what you see all the time. But most people forget utilitarianism has been around for a couple of centuries, but it's a 19th century type. Um, should I say, is it 19? Yeah, no, not 19th century. Is it Victorian? Or should I say 1700s? I'm trying to think. No, 18th century or 19th. Well, actually, it was. Let me correct the year. I want to be correct. I want to be correct on this because I'm trying to figure out what year did it started. Because I got the philosophy basics. Okay, where it came from. Okay, the years. It started 18th century to 19th century, so it's a couple of centuries old. Okay, let's look at it. Yeah, 18th century. 18th century. My fault. Yeah, it started 18th century by a guy named Jeremy Bentham. That's an 18th century doctrine. Not, a lot of people trust it came into the Victorian period. Not necessarily. It came 18th century during the time before the Revolutionary American Revolutionary War. So it birthed America's philosophies. So they got it from guys from the 18th century England. They try to say it's a Victorian. It's not really a Victorian. The Victorian is short lived. It lasted to the 19th century, but 18th century they were brand new. So that's beyond the Victorian era. It's a part of it, but it was before it, I believe. I don't know who was ruling. It could be Queen Victoria. We don't know. I'll do some research on it and let y'all know. I'll do another recording on this where it came from. But it is old. It's been around a long time. I got things to back it up. So unless y'all want to know about the philosophy, but yeah, I got this at the Britannica.com. Says with the different factual assumptions, however, utilitarian arguments can lead to different conclusions. If as one assumes that the strong government is required to check humans, basically selfish interest, and they any change may threaten to the stability of the political order. One may be led by utilitarian arguments. Two, and the authoritarian or conservative position. Here we go. On the other hand, William Goodwin, and an English political philosopher of the early 19th century, that's when it really was on fire, okay, assuming the basic goodness of human nature and argued that the greatest happiness would follow from a radical alteration, a radical alteration of the society in direction of anarchism. That's what they say in so many terms. But utilitarian is not really anarchy. It's basically liberal. But you see, like what I just read right there, talking about the stability and things like that. So here we go. Yes, it was birthed out of the 18th century doctrine. So, and the concept of utilitarianism, I'm gonna tell y'all, it came from Epicureanism. I told y'all this before, but it got its mark in the 19th century. That's when shit changed. See, in 18th century, it started by Jeremy Bentham, and he birthed the concept, and then later he studied Epicureanism, of course, then pushed it all the way to the 19th century. So what you got today, okay? It's an old concept. America been using it for a long time, and that's why people's under this spell why they can't move things differently. You know what I'm saying? Like you got dudes say it's not hedonistic, but dude, it is hedonistic. Do your research. You got conflators in certain spaces trying to brainwash our people to teach this stuff, but I'm here to tell you, it is what it is. Classical economics receives some of its most important statements from utilitarian writers. Let's read this part again. Classical economics receives some of its most important statements from utilitarian writers, especially David Ricardo and John Stuart Mill. Ironically, its theory of economic value was framed primarily in terms of the cost of labor in production rather than the terms of the use of value or utility of accommodations. Later developments more clearly reflect the utilitarian philosophy. The English economics, William Jevons, one of the founders of the marginal utility a school of analysts, and derive of many of his ideas from the Bethan and welfare economics, while substituting the comparative preference for the comparative utilities, reflected the basic spirit of the utilitarian philosophy. But in economic policy, the early utilitarians had to tend to oppose government interference in trade and in industry on the assumption that the economy would regulate itself for the greatest welfare and left alone. But later utilitarians, however, lost confidence in social efficiency of the private enterprise, were willing to see the governmental power administration and to correct its abuses. As the movement for the reform, social institutions, 19th century utilitarians was remarkably successful in the long run. Most recommendations. Try to get this advertisement on the way. Governmental process uses and corrections and abuses. Okay. Left alone inefficiency. Okay. As the movement grow, okay. Changes in policies, okay. So that's what it says. The summary and evaluation of Betham and all this other stuff. We talked about it. But yeah, that's the effects of utilitarianism. I'm just reading off to you in the roots of choose of humanism and all this stuff. But yeah, it's basically, I read that off to you. I didn't show you the screen and share. I was just reading off to you. And they said the 2020 pandemic. This is interesting. Okay. When we talk about it, bioethics. Okay. I'm going to share this with y'all. Y'all give me 1 second, y'all. I'm gonna get this out of the way. Bioethics, pandemic. I'll let y'all bump the screen up. Okay. Bioethics. Bioethics, excuse me. Bioethics. Online library.com. Bioethics. 19, original article. And here we go. Utilitarianism and the pandemic. There are no egalitarians in the pandemic. Let's read this part again. There are no egalitarians in the pandemic, but the scale of the challenges for health systems and public policies means that there is an inductible inductible need to prioritize the needs of many. It is impossible to treat all citizens equally, and a failure to carefully consider the consequences of actions could lead to massive preventable loss of life. In a pandemic, there is a strong ethical need to consider how to do good overall. But utilitarianism is an influence moral theory that states that the action is expected to produce the greatest good. Here we go. That's that BS. That's why people got caught up in it. They're familiar with this philosophy. I told y'all in the previous two recordings of part one and part two. Greatest good. It offers clear operational operational operationalizable principles. Damn, that's a mouthful. I'll read that again. It offers a clear operationalizable principles, but in this paper will provide a summary of the utilitarianism could inform two challenging questions that have been important in the early phases of the pandemic. But the triage, which the patient should have receive access to the ventilators, and if something overwhelming demanding of outstripping and supplying lockdown, how could the countries decide when to implement these stringent social restrictions, balancing preventing the deaths from C-19 with the causing of deaths and the reductions in well-being from other causes? Our aim is not to argue that the utilitarianism is the only relevant ethical theory or favor of the purely utilitarian approach. However, it's clearly considering the options of which, I mean, the options of will do the most good, but overall will help societies identify and consider the necessary costs of other values. But societies may have choose to, to either to embrace or not to embrace the utilitarian course, but with a clear understanding of the values involved in prices they are willing to pay. See, that's the philosophy that's so damning. And they said the introduction of C-19, of course, and all this stuff. That's a long read. But they said is utilitarianism. We talked about that before. Y'all can watch my previous act the rule. There's two-level utilitarianisms. So basically, I'm just reading this small part for y'all. It's a long read. I'm not going to try to read all this. But basically, like I said, the abstract knowledge of what they said there was no egalitarians, which it wasn't. It was a bad year, and all this other stuff. So basically, utilitarianism has its own concepts, and it's been around forever. A lot of people know that this stuff is relevant. So we just read by the bioethics, or should we say, the online library wiley.com by bioethics of utilitarianism and the pandemic, how it solved everything. And everybody was familiar with the concept. So I'm gonna leave this up here, and we got to go back what it means. And yes, the philosophy, and you try to say what it means. And I talked about this over and over again. Y'all can see it in the playlist, and y'all can keep up with what I'm talking about. And the reason I'm pushing this, I understand that it's a hedonistic theory that still works, and people get so hedonistic, they will say, in the society, and they're pushing it so hard, and that's why a lot of times a lot of stuff don't get done. Okay, and a lot of stuff don't get done. It's the simple fact that people just do this stuff over and over again. So normally, I see this all the time, and I think a lot of people just expect people to be more. And the thing I see is that this philosophy has always had its pros and cons. I told you, we talked about the pros and cons on the Green Garage, 13 disadvantages, and we told you what it was. It's a typical theory that works in some aspects, but it's actually ruining governmental societies. People get caught up, and that's the brainwashing they showed you. It's got some pros, yes, but most people are not happy. I told you about the cons, and it's six cons not good. Philosophy don't work half the time. It's not realistic. Nihilism is the only one that's more realistic than anything. It's a pure philosophy that comes close. People are unknown for it, but they're scared to talk about it. Nihilism is really the answer. Indifference is the answer. That's the only solution we have is the men here in America, in so-called America, especially so-called black men. Nihilism is the way. If you do it right in its right form, you would understand that survival is key. Period. No SBE in here. Yeah, the SBE is still here to stay, but let it run its course. It's going to continue. You know what I'm saying? So with that, that's all I got, and I'm just gonna say it like, yeah, utilitarianism is like it's just what it is. It's one of those philosophies that's been around forever. And I told y'all, it has its history, it has its moments. And I ain't gonna research it more how it affects modern society, but it just boils down to one thing. You have to understand where you're getting your philosophy from, where you're getting your concepts from, where are you getting your admirations from. You know what I'm saying? Like, we understand what's here and what's not. We understand that. We understand the fact that people understand what's going on, you know? But that's the whole purpose of me talking to y'all like this all the time, but it's pretty much the same, you know? Yeah. Let me get in this motion real quick. All right. I will see y'all at Thursday Thrills. Of course, Thursday Thrills 55, I mean. Thursday Thrills 55, and I'll see y'all there. So with that, until next time, signing off. Shalom to the people of Israel, known as Yasharal, of course. So with that, I'm signing off and I'm out.